in the den of iniquity. Vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment. What's a pity? Tomorrow never certain. What dwells behind the curtain? The face of evil lurking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble that either pop or topple. Many will fall and stumble. Let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso. Cannons will breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And click that like button, the subscribe button if you have not already, and the notification bell. Today we're going to be talking about the talk about police encounter. Anyways, Aitoa, how's it going? How's the microphone? How's the camera? How are the lights?
The microphone's good. The lights are good. Thank you for having me today.
Okay, cool. So your game is good, so you can, it's picking it up rather well.
Okay, do you want me to turn it down?
No. I think you just you can speak, you can moderate your voice and do what you can. Yeah.
Okay.
You can have a whole opera going or whatever.
I'll just make sure I speak gently.
Now, you are a parent of boys.
Three boys.
Yeah. Is it fair to call them black boys?
That's
a good one. But obviously, so you have a personal relationship with this topic, right?
I do.
Okay. So yeah, we're going to be reviewing this video by Glenn Lowry. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but and typically I don't watch these videos before I review them. I just like, oh, this is a good clip from a clip. And there are a couple of clips today, ladies and gentlemen, but we're talking about the talk that presumably African-American ADOS FBA parents have to tell their kids, their boys, tell the black boys about the encounter with the police and what is likely to happen to them. And this obviously asks the question, well, what is something disproportionately likely to happen to them? What are the numbers with regards to that, right? Right. Is it primarily a racial issue, or is it primarily socioeconomic? Is it primarily demographic and also, shall we say, location dependent? For example, urban areas and certain types of things like that. Such and such and such, right? One could ask these questions. But let's listen a little bit, but I'm also curious as to your personal quote unquote relationship with the topic. Let's go.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and make some noise for Professor Glenn Lowry.
The reason for this disproportion in black crime is racism. Didn't you know that? I mean, when I see a disproportion between white and black people in behavior or achievement, what I see is racism. Last time I checked, that was the wisest way for an enlightened person to think about these things, that rises above all the possible biases that we might have. And so these young men are doing these things because we live in a racist society where they have no choice. Didn't you know that, Glenn? Just trying to remind you of the truth.
I don't take any pleasure, in broaching this issue. I'm just trying to be faithful to the forum and to what it is that we do when we talk.
You realize I'm kidding.
No, that's complete bullshit. I mean, come on, that's bullshit. You took a pistol and fired it out the window of your car driving past a gang rival and ended up killing a little 6-year-old sitting on her auntie's lap because of racism? Nobody believes that.
He didn't have a dad. He didn't have a dad.
Oh, and that's due to racism?
Don't shoot that
fact
gun
that
out
his
the window.
father was irresponsible and wouldn't take care of his own children is due to racism? Come on.
The war
Nobody believes that.
The war on drugs was instituted partly because of racism, and that's probably what sent his dad up the river.
Okay, I mean, I have heard that argument, but it's just complete BS, man. Come on, I mean, I don't know. You guys can tell us. We can take some questions at the end whether or not this is crazy. I don't think anybody believes it.
And now here we hit this point, but I think it's an important point. Is the guy who Omar does this? It's this character that we've created. Is Omar evil for shooting that gun out the window, or has Omar grown up watching people do that and thinks it's the only way to prove his masculinity? And now I'm not kidding. In Omar's head, that's all he knows. I can't hate Omar. I just think it's a shame that Omar has gone somewhere where that's a norm.
I don't hate him. I'm mad as hell at him, and I'm prepared to judge his behavior as contemptible. And there may be reasons why he has behaved in that way, and I'm not sure your story exhausts the list of what those reasons might be. But if we can't hold people accountable for their...
I decided to play this one first before we get into the talk question. Okay, I did an okie doke on you there.
You did.
But I wanna ask you the question about this idea of explaining things, right?
Mhm.
Of needing to know why and having an explanation, or then having a counter explanation. And a lot of times perhaps it has to do with intractable problems that we've not found traction with regards to solving yet, right? And we therefore postulate all kinds of forms that the problem might take, or what it is. It's racism, it's this, it's that, whatever. Some are more tractable or actionable than others, right?
Right.
Like someone whom says, for example, no, it's schools and prisons reform of such and such a manner. Seems more testable, right?
Right.
Someone might also say something vague, such as systemic racism. And the problem with systemic racism is it's not very tractable.
Right.
Even though you could come up with 1,000 different ways why, or different reasons why I should fund you so you can fight systemic racism. But it doesn't have much meat on the bones, if you will. But what do you think about this whole need to know, right? Aspect of what's going on here? Because does it matter why, why do we get in this secondary battle about why and casting judgments? Like, maybe I've gone on too long, but
No, you're good.
Let's riff on this for a little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we have to look at it this way. Asking why allows you to throw out an opinion, and opinions have no accountability. I think it's the system, or I think it's this, and they become the why just allows opinions to jump around. I think what we need to look at, from my perspective as a parent, as a father of 3 boys, that for one thing, I tell my boys the term is African American as opposed to black, because black is a color. and common sense will tell you that if you scanned our skin color under a microscope, it's not, under a hex value, you're not going to get 6 digits of zeros, which is the hex value for black. But anyways, I think that we have to look at what's going on in the home, because that's where everything begins. And I don't want to cut too deep into the butter with this hot knife, but I will start by saying that it always starts at home. That's where it starts out. If someone is raised in a home where there's a certain way to communicate, there's a level of communication that is accepted or practiced that's typically demonstrated by the immediate family members, such as parents, brothers, relatives, one will expect that tradition or that way of talking to one another at the house should continue. Don't you agree?
Correct. So again, the problem is certain you see a disproportionate activity, in this case crime, right?
Right.
Amongst a particular group, right? Like, this group, okay, is 40% of the population. Okay, it's doing 40% of the crime. Good. Some group over here is 13%, and it's doing more than its fair share, if you will, of
Right.
the crime. Then you, or whatever it may be, if it's probably whatever metric you're judging here, then you focus in on that group and you ask why questions. And as you mentioned, so people could throw out opinions and all that kind of stuff. But really, at the end of the day, where you brought it back to is, well, what tends to happen is acculturation of the individual into acculturation and civilization of the individual into society, and done typically in these early groups, which is
Right.
called the family, right?
Right.
And then you kind of you sort it out from there, and
Right.
obviously you're gonna spot the few weirdos and psychopaths, right? They're there too while you're growing
Right.
up, and oh, that one will never change,
Right.
or whatever.
They're
And-
they're part of the equation.
They're also those are factored in.
Right.
But that if we focus on that,
Mhm.
then this hovering above and arguing about the abstract why of why this particular disproportionate outcome, right? That's one thing. Okay, but let me throw another one. What do you think about this? With
Okay.
regards to also judging, you take a population of people,
Mhm.
okay, and you say, oh, these ones have blonde hair, right? And these
Mhm.
ones don't have blonde hair. Let me find out how many blondes go to Harvard, okay? And then let me start asking questions about why the percentage of blondes have been reducing or increasing, blah, blah, blah. How is that different from when we take any other kind of demarcation? Racial demarcation, this, that, the other, immigrants versus this, right? So in other words, there are many ways to slice up a population conceptually, right?
Yeah.
So what is this thing that we're doing? In other words, the absurd example of the blonde is to highlight a point, okay? And what do you
Right.
think about that point that is being highlighted there, that whole dance?
I believe that, and I remember watching a video a couple of years ago, and this lady really enlightened my mind, and she talked about the fact that there's trauma associated with the African Americans in the country and the United States, and that trauma is the leading cause of how African Americans may react to those statistics. Because as a human species, one of the things that we thrive on is we're able to make statistical data. We're able to use that information to make decisions. We can say, hey, this amount of students come in, this amount of student graduates, this in this neighborhood, this gender, this culture, this minority, not culture, excuse me, this minority, this group of people are doing XYZ. And as we start to tailor it to the negatives, if you will, or to the crime rates, there is trauma associated with it. I mean, I don't know if I'm going too far.
Yeah, but it inevitably goes to the negative. I would say, okay, good. So you've come along for the obvious, the fact that we do this. And you said that
Right.
it is an offshoot of certain useful techniques. Useful
Right.
techniques in this case being analysis. Analysis meaning basically you cut things up, right?
Right.
Lysis is but you're cutting things up. You're looking at things, you're weighing them, and you're following some form of rationality, some form of experimentation, the scientific method. You're saying all that is good, but
Right.
then here's the thing: nothing that could be all good over here, okay? But there is an inevitable desire for human beings to play status games,
Right.
okay? And then to use whatever kind of information we have and the tools we have, for example, these tools of reasoning that we have and narrative building that we have, to then tell other stories, slice the group into this way and
Right.
compare and say, hey, my shoes are shinier, right? The shoes of my grandfather's, whatever, my DNA, this, that, the other, and it could go on, and it tends towards division rather than unity.
Correct.
This particular okay, cool. So far it's not a crazy argument.
It isn't.
Okay, well, now let's get into the talk, okay, because we've talked
Okay.
about behavior so far, and now we're going to talk about the talk about police encounter.
Pat Rimmel asks,
I have followed arguments that both of you've made regarding the fact that Black men are not disproportionately killed by police once poverty and other variables are accounted for. However, I've not heard as much discussion regarding the disproportionate use of hands-on or rough treatment by police toward Black men, as referenced, for example, by Roland Fryer in his work. I'm curious what both of you think about this pattern of police behavior. Is it unfair? Is it warranted? Or is it something in between? And what are the nuances? Perhaps related to this, what do you think of the talk that Black parents have with their teenage sons to prepare them?
Before they get into the talk, though,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think about this data about, well, I'm not sure how, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the whole thing, how one
Okay.
might collect this data with regards to whom is more rough handled, if you will. Apparently, the police are using more rough behavior or
Mhm.
rough tactics. So goes the study. You want to find out. It's an empirical question. So how would you test that? And apparently, it is said that by some study that more rough treatment is going on the side of the African
The lesser
American.
neighbor. Yeah, I think that what's happened is there has been, the narrative has lived on, you know, that you have to treat them with force. You have to treat them, and it's almost normal, and it's very sad because I heard I was in a debate, a healthy debate, I should add, where we were talking about discipline, you know, how to discipline children, and someone says something that was so profound. She says, all that discipline stuff that you're talking about, it doesn't work for Black folks. You know, meaning that if you take the have a conversation approach, let's talk about it. Let's I'm not going to yell at you. I'm going to just go one-on-one with you. Her take was it doesn't work with Black folks. I beg to differ. You know, I beg to differ. I believe those conversations can work. But as far as going back to the topic at hand, is it rougher in the hood? I believe that if you are dealing with an environment that systematically produces the difficult or the non-law abiding citizens, you have to use a matching force. I would imagine police officers over there have to be somewhat bigger, have to be somewhat tougher, and they have to understand street language a little bit. So our society produces what it needs to take care of itself. You know,
Okay,
there's
so
you're right.
let's pause there at where you added these other factors. You
Right.
said that you mentioned the hood.
Right.
And by that, perhaps there's a connotation. In other words, we're assuming here there's a location where there's perhaps high crime,
Correct.
right? And there's a lot of encounter by the police as a result of what one may argue with the rightness or wrongness of that fact, because there are some things about, well, you know, the police should back off a little bit. There are other things
Right.
about the police, you know, but we want the cops here because the crime is here, and the actual people whom living in the neighborhood whom are not committing these crimes do want protection, right?
Right.
And you know, and they want to feel safe at night too, right? And all that. So you made this distinction saying the hood, high crime, a lot of encounter with the police. So, you know, frayed nerves on the part of the police, where it's just like, you know, over here, this is what you just got to do. You got to go in there, knock it down, and get out. So that kind of attitude develops where, you know, it's not like they have any love for this community per se. And it just so
Right.
happens to be that you have African Americans there, right? So
Yes.
these will be the facts, right? That, and in any quote unquote regression analysis, silly term. Well, there are always a number of factors in any in typical equations, right? It could be one, or it could be five, or whatever. And when it comes to these certain multifactorial problems like this, where these things sometimes they come together as a confluence. In other words, like poverty and
Mhm.
high crime, and then there'll be particular racial groups there. It is hard to disaggregate what
It gets
exactly is
tricky.
going on there.
It gets
It's-
tricky.
Yeah, you can compare with. There've been books written about this, right? The Hillbilly Elegy, I believe, is one of them that looks at, let's say, Appalachia, for example, that looks at the place where, you know, it's meth and opiates and same thing, killing and no, and one parent households and whatnot.
Correct.
Right? So one can look at that and say, hey, there is a connect here. If again we go back and stop slicing the data in a particular way, if we start asking about blondes versus dark-haired people and just start asking socioeconomic questions rather,
Right.
but that is that's just wishful thinking, because I'm talking about human beings here, and human beings are gonna do
They're gonna do what they've been doing.
they're gonna
for
look
years.
at things the way they look at things because they have certain incentives, one of which is
Right.
the whole status game and identity game. And there is no way for you to, no matter how much of an individual you claim to be, you cannot avoid the pride or shame associated with certain types of identity groups things, even though it's one of the things that I advise that one watches. Like, watch, let's say a particular statistic is given about a group that you happen to belong to, and you feel a certain kind of pride. Watch that, right? Watch what you're doing, right? Because that is something that is still in control of you, right?
Interesting. Very, very, very true.
And watch also the shame aspect or the whatever, because you don't. The point is, those feelings are never gonna go away. It's like saying, you throw the glass. It's the universe, right?
Right.
It does what it does, right? It's the body. Okay, cool. These are the rules of the stuff. It's like if I come at you with a knife like that, your heart's gonna go up. Like, it is what it is. So there are these affinities and aversions and this identity thing that goes on. But the idea is to watch and just be a little, create a little distance.
And if I may comment on that, I remember doing a research where I started looking at the African American reputation from a different set of lenses. And one of the things that I did is I looked at all the major sports, just as an example, and I went as far as looking at music. And the African American is one of the dominant in terms of sports, physical abilities and things in that nature. So sometimes we look at, we're being classified, and we can easily fall victim to the negative classification. But there are classifications that distinct us, the African American, as a group that's known to be athletic, in different sports. I looked at boxing, I looked at baseball, I looked at football, I looked at basketball, I looked at many sports, I looked at music, and being part of that group isn't all bad, right? There are some positives, and I think sometimes we need to step and look at those positives.
Yeah, you step and look at the positive, you step and look at the negative, and then
Right.
obviously you look at both positives and negatives with the understanding that at both ends you're playing the identity game,
The same game. That's correct.
and you need to create the distance between yourself and all games in life. It will be an extreme. In other words, you can go extreme with this advice, but I think it's applicable to all.
Correct.
I'm a little bit more extreme with this type of advice in terms of like being dispassionate about things, and it's an obvious personality preference. I should say it that way, right? So it's good advice for everybody, but for me, I'm just like, oh yeah, all day, yes, I'm going to just be cold and dispassionate about everything. Better watch
Right.
out for everything,
Suspect everything.
Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the talk about encountering the police. And prior to getting into that talk, we talked about the disproportionate use of rough behavior on the part of the police towards particular groups, in this case, the African Americans. And we looked at one aspect, Aitwa, of what may be going on here. But then I think that's a separate topic in and of itself. Now let's get into the talk. Let's get into the talk.
Yeah.
And four encounters with the police. What is or should be the substance of these talks, and how do you think the resulting teenage behavior affects police behavior in these encounters? Okay, so that's Pat Rimmel on police use of force, short of lethal force, in dealing with blacks. Have any thoughts on that, John?
I do. I think that from what Roland's study said,
some of the older videos are kind of just interesting. This actually is not. It's not a very old one actually, but his microphone is just funny. Just the John busts out.
I know, right?
It's like
It was like an American Idol audition mic.
Like, what's going on here? It's like TGI Friday karaoke night. Set of microphones just happen to be laying down in the house.
Mentioned, frankly, Apple intuition. It's clear that while the cops do not kill Black people disproportionately once you factor in poverty, that the cops are rougher with Black people. That cannot.
And by the way, this is a claim of a particular study by Roland Fryer, an academic, saying that there is disproportionately rough behavior, but when you factor in poverty, which we talked about factoring in things, multifactorial, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at poverty, that they're not disproportionately killing, then yeah, they're killing the right percentage. They're like, 13% or whatever it is, the quota of killing that you get for a particular group is just the right amount of killing. Anyways.
Be glibly denied. And it is a problem. I, for one, have tried to always acknowledge it when I write about these things. But the thing is, the dialogue does tend to be that the cops kill. It's all about killing. And do take that away. There is an issue with putting your hands on people, speaking roughly to people, etc. And I think that out on the ground, that informs the way this sort of thing is discussed just as much as the issue of whether or not the cops actually kill people. It's how the cops treat people. And it definitely needs to be addressed. I'm not aware of arguments that say that once you factor in how the Black people in question act, that there is no difference. Not aware that.
Okay, so let's look at this question here, because we've talked about the encounter and the rough behavior on the side of the cops. And there's always that question. I remember this comedian, Tim Conway, he would talk about hearing a story that a man just killed his wife or something. It's like, oh my God, what did he do? Yeah, he shot her right in the forehead. It's like, wow, that's horrible. That's sad. Did they have any kids? Yeah, the 2 kids. Like, yeah, crap. And then he goes, and he starts thinking in the back of his mind, like, I wonder what she said though. But I just want to know,
what led to that, huh?
I just wonder what, I'm sorry and everything and the kids and all. Yeah, fine, but I'm wondering what went on here. So in the same case, you're wondering, okay, is there a Black attitude, or shall we say an African American attitude, whatever this attitude is, whether it be in only media land or in marketing land or in image land, that you have a bad image, a bad reputation, right? Maybe only in reputation land, or also it may be real. But is there a Black bad attitude that would perhaps fuel this rougher behavior from the cops? In other words, let me add more fuel to this particular argument here, because John McWhorter here on this video that we're watching, he has these characters, and Omar is one. Omar, which we started with, by the way, when I gave you the okie doke. Omar, okay, it was is this guy at the train in the subway that is kind of mean and kind of loud, and kind of has a rough attitude about things, like, like he's got a rough look in his face. He's not going to be polite, maybe he plays his music a little too loud, and he's going to give you that look like you can't step, that kind of a thing. Okay, right. Omar is Black, right? You probably already had the Black image in your head before, of course, said anything else. So whether Omar is Omar a fiction? Okay, is it just all in our imaginations? In other words, where it's just a bad image, a bad reputation, you're only just seeing these things, blah, blah, blah. And whether real or not, it will affect other people's behavior towards Omar, right?
Absolutely. I do believe that, for one thing, your perception affects your reality. Whatever you've been fed that falls into you will shape your perspective. I remember sitting in a discussion dinner a couple of weeks ago, and a father was telling, he was giving some advice about what he tells his daughters, and he tells them, boys are bad. I'm like, that's not the right thing to tell someone, that boys are bad, and we went on in the argument. Basically, my point I was trying to make to him is, it's not about telling someone that another person is bad, but it's about teaching people how to react to difficult situations or situations they don't understand, because that's a lot more empowering than simply labeling good or bad. So going back to that description, is that something to tell another person? Well, I think that's one of the problems. We're sowing these seeds and these ideas that are shaping the reality. What you imagine and assume that's, I believe the universe will conform to that. I'm sure you've been in a room where you're hot and the person next to you is cold, right? And you're saying, how can you, it's 100 degrees outside, but they're cold. That's their reality. And what our society is doing, we are turning to the person who's cold and 100-degree temperature and adjusting the thermostat to their liking. Not to go that deep into the topic there, but I think the assumptions that we're making, the character traits that we're putting in people's minds, they're making some of those reactions true because, that's what people are expecting.
So here's the thing. Yes, but here's the thing. Here's the pushback. The pushback is your reputation is your responsibility. Your marketing department is your responsibility. Your ad budget,
is yours.
Is your responsibility.
Exactly.
It's not. So in this case now, I'm like, okay, the Chinese have a reputation. The small hat people have a reputation. The Italians have a reputation. All kinds of people have a reputation. The Irish have a reputation. People have, the reputations have changed over time and so on and so forth. And who's responsible for making sure that we all have an even view of everyone's reputation or know where
each person is?
It's like, okay, each particular group, if you want to play the group identity game, then it's it's like, hey, I want to be part of this club. I'm a card carrying member of this club and I want to play the club game. It's like, well, it's your job to make sure that it's a good card to carry. It's your job to have the marketing department to make it correct. So
it goes back to what I was saying though, in that the marketing department starts in the house. Mm-hmm. Don't you agree? I just want to throw that out there as you're getting your thoughts together.
Yes, the marketing department definitely begins at the home, right?
Right.
So having this attitude of, even if it's all just fake, you have to understand that you have the building of a good image or good traits or whatever also involves a lot of fake. Anyone who has a marketing department, like for example, Google, the Google ads and everything, you think the way Google looks to you, the way you think that's actually the way Google works? Like, no, Google is filled with human beings, right? And Jeff from accounting is slow, and the systems that you're supposed to have with regards to meetings and stuff never freaking works. People never fill out the form. Same crap is going on in Google right now.
That is true.
Well, you think, ooh, Google, it's this perfect machine. No, that doesn't exist anywhere. Well, anyone who has ever worked in different organizations knows that just people everywhere.
They've done a good job at creating the right, perception. Similar
exactly.
to
That's
Apple.
What I'm saying. It's like, yeah, and it involves, quote unquote, what you may call a lie too, because you can say, hey, my bad image is a lie.
Right.
It's like the whole image thing is a lie. Okay, so and it's your job to create a good image. So again, let's bring it back to the topic of we're talking about Omar, or shall we say the black male reputation, black youth, young black man to whom this talk is relevant, the talk about encountering the police. We're talking about his image, and perhaps his image and maybe his attitude and maybe the kinds of words that he uses are contributing to this rough behavior. Mm-hmm. And we're saying, okay, whether it is true that this image is real or not, it is there.
Right.
And it's your responsibility to do this required magic, the required artistic work and whatever, to change that image. It is no one else's. You can say, oh, but I have enemies tarnishing my image. It's like, yeah, McDonald's is attacking Burger King all the time, I'm sure. But it's Burger King's responsibility to rebrand, come out.
That's true. Yeah, so to my thoughts on that are as follows. I mean, I think that's where that's what the talk, right? And one of the things that I've learned, especially with raising men and boys, they're more bound to do what they see other boys do, right? So as a parent, they are bound to reflect what they see me do. So one of the things that I don't do this with my kids. I don't yell. I don't cuss. I don't ever look frustrated. If I'm frustrated, I start to whisper. And what I realize that I'm doing in the process is teaching them emotional intelligence. In other words, if you feel a certain kind of way, you're just experiencing emotion. Emotion is just data. It's just your body telling you something's going on. Should I fight or should I flee, right? And if we go back to the hood, we don't have people teaching them the how to fight or flee. the immediate response is like, man, you know, you're disrespecting me, or you're going this way, you're going that. So one of the things that I'm always teaching my boys is you're only responsible for how you react and how you act. That's it. You can't control what people say to you. You can't control how people treat you, but you can always control how you react. And that's the responsibility that I think that if you talk about those neighborhoods, the targeted neighborhoods, they're missing that type of quality voice. So they're going by what they see the other boys in the hood do, and the cycle continues.
So let me mention something here while we're on image. Okay. There is a big problem with one of the particular, let's just call it the media. Okay. We're talking image. Hey, it's the media. Okay. Male, especially black male control within the media is black, or shall we say male media, and the kinds of which will be a great mechanism for, shall we say, doing the image magic that you need to do on this community level now, is actually a problem in terms of the actual numbers, in terms of the control by, let's say, black men of media. And there's someone who jump out and mention like Tyler Perry. It's like, well, I'm not talking about. Yeah, it's like, and that's the one out of the exception that proves the rule, or that kind of thing. It's like, you know, and it's like, yeah, but that's you know, that's part of the problem, you know. So that voice actually is missing. Number one, the masculine voice is missing from the culture in general.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then you have in this case, if you have to talk about this marketing department, right? This image department, and there's a particular group of men who have this bad reputation that they need to fix, and it is their responsibility to fix, regardless of whom their opponents are, right? Then this idea of the media taking back the public space, taking back the airtime, taking back the narrative is very important, is it not?
It is. And you can argue that they are a business and their job is to sell the exciting stories, right? And nothing gets clicks and views, you know, than a topic like similar to what we're doing on the news, right? What are your thoughts on it?
Women spend close to 80% of the dollars. Okay, so you want to sell stuff, you got to sell stuff to women. That's a huge part of it, and it's not going to change, right? It's like one of the things that we say, that's not going to change. So that's we got to understand the nature of one of the particular contours of a landscape you're trying to get into, right? And this contour here is women doing the spending, so so things are going to be tilted a certain way. But then there are other ways to circumvent and do other types of things, right?
It is, and that's a good point, because you know, if we take that argument and that statistic that is 80%, then you could start to ask some other questions. And this is completely off topic, you know, just throwing this as it relates, is they were talking about the disparity between the WNBA and the NBA players, right? And it says, well, men watch sports, women don't. But why all the money going to sports? Is it that men are directing their spending into sports? You know, so I just thought that was an interesting number that you throw out there about the 80%.
Yeah, but you know, control of money and just the spending and all that, and the.
I like this question here, by the way.
Yeah, it's a statement, right, regarding the second generation immigrants.
Right.
Yeah. So that's an interesting. And we might get there as we move on here.
Okay.
Through the landscape.
Black people, I'm not aware that they're my thought because of something happening in this room that is of no importance. I'm by myself. Anyway, I'm not aware that that's something that isn't true. I don't think you can factor it out. And yeah, it deserves discussion. Now, in terms of what parents should tell Black kids, I think that it is not necessary for parents to tell their Black kids that they're in danger of being killed by the police. But I certainly would understand if somebody felt that they needed to tell a Black boy in particular that when you're dealing with the cops, that is not a time to think about self-expression. That's not a time to show off for your friends. Just be courteous. There's a specific issue here, and I have written about this. I don't know what one would do about it. There's a language issue here. The way Black people talk to each other.
Before getting into the language issue, he touched a little bit on something which may be a class issue. For example, are you worried that if your kids are you worried about the next time your kid encounters a cop and beyond the regular? Are you thinking, oh, black kid? Are you thinking, oh, the police, or something crazy is going to happen, is going to get shot? Are you worried, or do you agree with John McWhorter here, who says he doesn't really believe that's going on amongst a particular class of people?
Let me speak on the topic first of, do I think this is going to happen? I don't tell my boys, hey, when you run into a police officer, I don't do any of that stuff. I think that what I'm just trying to teach my boys is emotional intelligence, knowing how to use and control your emotions, entertaining feelings that make you uncomfortable, and knowing that you can be calm, you can be collected, you can speak properly. And it starts, again, like I said earlier, it starts with me. Now, of course, a lot of, we talked about the male voice missing in a lot of these communities, so they don't have that example. So as long as that environment is the same, as long as those male voices are missing, nothing's really going to change. What we could say is that the police officers need to step back a little bit. They need to understand that there might be language barriers or cultural barriers, the way an African American will react to a situation, that theirs is different. But ultimately, I think the goal here is emotional intelligence. Let's talk about it. How can you stay calm, right?
Yeah, and I'm probably more one to balk against authority in my own silly way. And hence, I've understood this particular trajectory. What's this trajectory I'm talking about? With regards to encountering the cops and moving from a particular type of car to another type of car, right? Moving from a particular type of neighborhood to another type of neighborhood. Okay? I've had many encounters with the cops. Okay, okay, and I've been I've been arrested like 5 times. Okay, that is a fact. The things are not big deals, but it's just, I like to live on the edge. Now, when you're doing it because you're broke in community college and you have this hoopty
Chafee College
that barely runs, a Chafee College, and you're driving a Chevy Cavalier that barely works, right?
Playing the Simpsons.
And your registration, of course, because you need insurance for the registration. I remember there was a time before you didn't need the registration and insurance were not really tied.
They weren't related.
Yeah, and then they tied it. They're like, damn, they got.
They got us.
So your registration, obviously, your tags are bad. You're pulling out, and there's a certain kind of encounter you have with the police. But I tell you, when I was in Orange County in a Cadillac, the tags would still be bad, and the tags, but this time just because maybe I forgot, they wouldn't even look.
Hey, true story.
And I'm still doing the same kind of shady behavior. Whatever shady behavior got me in trouble before, trust me, I'm still doing all the shady stuff. Okay,
but they don't bother you.
But they don't bother me in Orange County in a Cadillac. Okay, but I had all kinds of issues in the hood in Kentucky.
That's a funny story. When I got my Tesla, my tags were expired, and I got a letter from the DMV saying, hey, there was something that they didn't do properly at the dealer, so I needed to come down to DMV. You know how that goes. I'm like, I don't have time to go to the DMV. For 7 months, my tags were expired. And get this, I'm rushing to a basketball game because I live up in the north side of Fontana, so it's a nicer neighborhood. Okay. And I made a right turn. The light was red, and I just cut it. And if you know anything about a Tesla, it picks up speed pretty quickly. So I zoom right there, and the biker cop follows me, and he walks over to my window and says, "How you doing today, sir?" I'm like, "I'm doing good. You know the reason why I pulled you over?" I was like, "Yeah, I ran that red light. I'm trying to rush to this basketball game." He says, "Can I see your driver's license and registration?" I'm like, "Here's my driver's license, but my tags are expired because they gave me some issues at the DMV." He goes, "All right, I'm just gonna give you a warning. Just go ahead and take it easy because you ran through that light pretty fast, And I'm thinking, my God, I remember being pulled over for an hour and 45 minutes back in Upland because I didn't turn on my headlights. They searched my car and all kinds of crap happened. So you're absolutely right. The neighborhood and the type of car changes everything.
Yep. And therein is that whole image thing.
Right.
And you see it in your real palpable reality there, where the image magic, the lie worked.
Right.
You're
It
doing
always
this
works.
Same you, same shady behavior, still speeding as you've always done, right? Okay. but it changes. So that matters a lot. But it's your responsibility
To change that image.
to change the image, change the environment, leave
right.
the place, and also and the whole media thing. By the way, we'll touch on as we go on and on with this, because I think it's a key part to getting. You're talking about the men not being in the home. The men are not even in the social space, media wise, and in the images, right? In the narrative, men are nowhere. So, anyways, let us continue with this, and let's talk about the behavior, perhaps, that some people, with regards to language, talking about. I whoop your ass and stuff. Let's go ahead.
There's a language issue here. The way Black people talk to each other can be processed by outsiders as threatening or angry in a way that it isn't intended. I think that often, I've read about it, and I can certainly imagine it. The way a Black teenager speaks to a cop, even when he's not trying to be particularly aggressive, can come off as more confrontational than what the white person would say. I think cops might learn to be somewhat sensitive to that. It's almost idealistic to suppose that we're going to go that far. There's a certain confrontational cadence involved in folk Black speech, especially among men, but just in general, the Black mother who'll say, "I'll tear your ass up." That doesn't mean anything, but white people on the outside often hear that and wonder, why talking to your child that way? And really it's because use of language differs on groups, and aggression in language can have meanings that are not meant as actually.
Okay, so I'm gonna say something here to co-sign, as they say, what he said, to double click on what he said. I heard recently. I've never heard that one before.
That's a good one. I got some nuggets on that one, but go ahead.
I gotta double click on what you said right there. But so to co-sign this thing, you can listen to the difference between Mandarin and Cantonese.
There you go. I was about to go there.
Right? And one of them sounds very aggressive for no damn reason. One of them just sounds angry. Okay? And we know how an Italian and a Greek will be talking, right? And doing this and
right. Lots of hand movement.
And they come close to you too and do all kinds of you're like, whoa, what's going on? Why all the drama, right? What's going on? Calm down. So if we take away the Black versus cop context, and we just talk about, hey, the different ways in which people talk, interact, we're talking about language also, the actual words that they may use and the ways in which they use them, does either raise the emotional temperature or bring it down of the situation when it is someone whom is not used to their particular mode of vibrating, right?
Right. Okay. Well, let me rock the boat a little bit. I want everyone listening to this to pretend right now, breaking news, there is a black bear, okay, or a black grizzly bear has been climbed up this tree and is in this neighborhood, and everyone's terrified. You will see an army of tranquilizer snipers, animal handlers, and you will see the news saying, we're doing everything in our power to protect this animal and make sure this animal comes down safely. And they will wait hours and they will safely snipe the bear and safely, right? And this is Ken Brockman, right? And safely bring down this bear and go on and on and on and say, we did everything. What you just witnessed right now is that with the tranquilizer dart, just to bring the bear to sleep. And even though visibly you could see these people dragging the bear, and they say the bear has been handled very gently. It might look a little rough, but this is actually safe for the bear. And then it's breaking news. It's been released back into the wild. So what does that mean? That means that in our society, we are smart enough to bring the right snipers, the right animal handlers to handle a grizzly bear. The same tactic may not work for a snake. So whoa, hold on a second. This is a snake. Look at that guy from Australia, bless his soul. Now I think he's resting in peace. to just get the snake by the tail, put it in the bag, and life goes on. And if it were different, if it was a termite, okay, well, we're gonna bring the termite guys, right? They're gonna come in and spray a little puff thing around the house, and 6 months, all the termites and ants are gone. My point is to stamp co-sign what he's saying. If you know that you're dealing with an African American that might be hostile, that might have a different way of expressing themselves, maybe you should arm yourself differently. That's what he's saying. However, the difference between a grizzly bear and those scenarios with a snake and the termites is there's language, there's the basic meaning of communication. How are you? That can only generate one response. License and registration, that can only generate one response. Here you go. You know the reason why I pulled you over today? I don't, as opposed to because I'm black. So sometimes some of these wounds are self-inflicted because we are not properly, educated, right? To deal with those situations.
After the first time you get pulled over, right? You should know you should have a routine.
Exactly. That's my point.
It's like one of those things. It's almost like, okay, obviously a couple of things came to mind when you were mentioning it. Like for example, you have a script, because what you're saying here is this is a scripted conversation that you're going to be having.
Exactly.
It's not a complicated, Supreme Court argument that you're about to present before the 9 justices, and they're going to be asking you questions. It's like, no, not really. Okay, it's going to be license and registration, blah blah blah, and it's going to be a general way in which they approach the car, say stuff, right? You've seen them all. You've seen one, you've seen them all, right?
Right.
So there's certain things you should know, like you're calm, you're giving them act like the windows down, you have your hand on you have your hands where they can see it, right? And when you're reaching for something, some people say, tell them that you're reaching for something. That's the best. But make it clear, like, okay, like through body language, like, can
I go ahead and get my registration?
Registration. Like, okay, glove compartment. Glove compartment, and they're like, yeah, okay.
Right.
Glove compartment. Get it to them. Step out the car. Okay, cool. Step out. Here's the thing: these people have some leeway in their power, right? And
the police officers, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, they can decide to let you off with a warning,
right?
Or they could be a total, just go all the way the other side, okay, and find reasons why you're going to end up in jail that night. Okay, so and also they're human beings. So I recall having this particular one where I'm following this guy. He's on a bike, so he pulls out of this, let's say like a strip mall or something. So I quickly rush with my car to follow him, right? Because we're going over to the next place. And the way I came out, because I'm following a bike, right? Because the bike he just goes. I'm like, oh crap, let me, It looked kind of aggressive to the cop, and the cop is like, whoa, and I kind of recognized that he was a little frustrated that night, right? So I was just following things, and he was saying things like, because he gave me a breathalyzer, because I was just going from a gig, and I did have a drink, but I wasn't past the 0.08 or whatever. And he was like, I can take you in even if it's not, even if it's below the limit, right? I'm like, yes. I'm just like, like he was looking. If I were to be like, what do you mean? It's below the limit. I'm like, then it would have gone.
Yeah, it would have escalated.
It would have escalated and would have gone completely the other way. So it's like, okay, fine. He won. Most of my encounters though with them in terms of pulling me over and all that kind of stuff has been generally good. Now, the best is typically with highway patrol or the sheriff. And then the local police in particular cities, that's typically has been the worst. I know the training is different,
of course,
and the pay is different,
right?
Which is
that affects everything.
that affects everything. I think
it goes back to the same thing about the police officers being rougher in the more poverty-stricken areas, right?
Exactly. So the less educated police officers, less educated, less paid police officers, less qualified, because I believe. There's one or the other. I believe it's a California Highway Patrol. You actually have to have a college degree, right?
Okay.
So, and all California Highway Patrols have always been cool with me. They just have a different demeanor about it, like about how they handle business, So let us continue here.
Okay.
Aggressive. That's something that somebody who lives in scars is less likely to know than a lot of black people, and that comes out in the way a teenager might say something to a cop. I wasn't doing nothing. And that might sound like he's about to, bust out or something. Whereas the white guy said, I didn't do anything. It's different. I shouldn't be doing this Richard Pryor white person, but you take my point.
No, you shouldn't.
And so I think that's it too. But no, that it's real. It's real. You can definitely, the cops aren't as nice to black people, but that's different from the cops always kill black.
Okay, well, that point is clear. The distinction between lethal violence of force and force short of lethal. The finding in Fryer's research that in Houston, there wasn't evidence of racially discriminatory use of lethal force, but in Houston, in New York City, and in other places that he studied, there's clear evidence of racial differences in the use of hands-on, putting on cuffs, making somebody get on the ground, pushing them around, kind of thing. So I think that's the fact. I think, of course, we're talking in very broad strokes here about cops. So are cops in a big city the same as cops in a small town or in a rural area? Or, does it matter if it's a high-end suburb that is substantially black or, in the ghetto? So I'd be loath to generalize. I don't think these blanket claims, cops are like this or like that, are necessarily all that informative. But some cops, under some circumstances, for sure. Another thing I think is it has consequences. It will undermine the cooperative spirit, if you will, or the attitude or standing that cops have in the minds of the people who are encountering them in this way. It'll foster, it creates a fertile ground for a propagandist to come around and say, fuck the cops, fuck the police, defund the police, The only good cop I met was a dead cop, practically saying stuff like that. I wouldn't call the cops because as soon as the cop comes, it's going to be trouble for everybody. And then people start telling their stories and so on. So I think to the extent that it is true that there's racial bias in the use of roughness by cops, it's a bad thing for both the people who are on the butt end of that, but also for the effectiveness of policing because you undermine confidence. Now, on the other side of that, I'll say.
Yeah. Any reactions to what they said so far?
I mean, it's one of those situations where I want my water hot, I want my water cold, I want my water room temperature. Everyone's going to give a different perspective. I think ultimately what people are experiencing in the hood, in those poverty-stricken communities, is a real problem. The way the police officers over there are different. And you and I have mentioned and shared different experiences and how we were treated when we drove, less desired vehicles, and the reaction of the police officers have been totally different. I've been pulled over doing 90 something and the police officer says, man, what's a rush? I said, I just had a buffet. I'm just trying to rush home. He was like, well, take it easy. And I drove off, and I was driving a BMW at the time. So you're absolutely right. The treatment is different. And that is something that I don't think it's ever going to leave humanity. If former President Obama walks into, like we had this discussion the other day in a Twitter space, if former President Obama walks into your church, everyone is automatically going to bring out the best version of themselves. They're going to greet him with respect. They're just because he is been an idol for a lot of people. And we're just using Obama because I don't know that even Trump might walk in as much as some it's a divided crowd with Trump. But because of who he is, he's going to demand the respect. Whether you call it the marketing department, whatever you want to call it, that is our human flaw. We are going to show up and give our best version to people that we deem are deserving, and we're going to put it down. And the person who is able to separate how they treat others is one of those that we call enlightened. In other words, I'll be nice. I'll be just as nice to the McDonald's employee or the dude asking me for $1.
Blind lady justice there being the ideal.
Right. So, and that's going to be a niche group of people really that will say, hey, I don't care whatever you're doing. I'm going to love you no matter what. I'm going to treat you nice no matter what. But it's in our human nature to do that. And it's one of the things that separates us from the animals.
Okay. So you're appealing to the better nature. I mean, the better angels of our nature, as it is put by Mr. Steven Pinker in one of his books. But anyway, so he's going to talk about the flip side because he talked about how this affects the police's image as well.
Right.
Hey, this is a vicious circle, a snowball effect of people don't have trust for the police. and people may be already suspicious, and they're in a poor neighborhood, and then you come in and you're heavy-handed, and now they don't trust you more. And every time you come, they're like, "What the hell?" And you're like, "Oh, how dare you? What the hell?" Then I'm gonna handcuff you, and then it snowballs, vicious circle. We know the deal.
Hey.
Right.
I mean, you hit at this. I mean, there could be small differences by race in the manner of the interaction with the cop. It might have to do with cultural, you say linguistic. Might be body language. It might be whether or not you're deferential. It might be tone of voice. Do you say yes, sir, or no, sir? Or do you have a sullen kind of attitude? And this affects the cop, affects the perception and the emotion of the cop. The other thing I'd say is, if there are a lot of Black criminals, how does he know that the one that he's dealing with isn't a Black criminal? And does that condition, how does he know he's not somebody who did something that was, should he think that because he sees the person as Black? No, of course not. Are most Blacks criminals? No, obviously not. But if I'm day in and day out encountering events in which the people who are perpetrating wrongful acts turn out vastly disproportionately to be Black, from a human psychology point of view, can you blame me for not being able to forget that when I'm encountering somebody who I should be trained contrary to that? But it seems to me there's a psychological stereotyping dynamic that goes on that might account for it. So, but I wouldn't. That wouldn't be the place that I would start to try to, comment on this thing. I'm just mentioning that as one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the talk is concerned, it's kind of a urban legend, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure people give the talk. I'm not disputing that, but isn't it kind of a performance? Isn't it a little bit? Hasn't it gotten a little bit like I can't find a taxi in New York City? I had to get my kids to talk.
The I can't find a taxi in New York City thing. I've never got the opportunity to test it, but it's a thing about taxi cabs, okay, the yellow cab in New York City not stopping for Black people, and apparently it's like it's a huge exaggeration these days. Like it's like nah, there's no problem. They'll stop for you, okay? Trust me. What are you talking about, bro? But I was listening to a conversation earlier where somebody was saying that there's still people who say it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way they say it, it's almost like they're telling you, like, I don't care if you think this is BS, but don't challenge me on it. In other words, it's like an utterance of religious doctrine.
Right.
It's like, yes, and I was there last month and I still couldn't get a cab. And you're like, do I want to argue with this guy whether he actually was able to get a cab or not? Maybe he didn't get a cab. I don't know. It's not worth it. Let's leave it alone, right? that kind of attitude.
It goes to, just to comment on that real quick. It goes back to what I'm saying. Your perception and your assumptions will shape your reality. If that were me, I would have said, man, there's just no taxis today. I mean, maybe I should call an Uber, you know what I mean? Or a Lyft. That would be me.
Rather than go to a party meeting,
Right.
some political party and make noise about, okay.
Shouldn't every parent instruct their kid, if they get pulled over by a police officer, to be polite, obedient, and keep your hands on the steering wheel and say yes, sir, and no, sir? What's wrong with that? I mean, as a Black person, I have 3 sons. I have 5 children. My sons are all grown now, but that I needed to sit them down. We grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts. It was mostly a white, middle-class, suburban of Boston type community. Did I feel like if they were going out for a party when they were in high school, I needed to tell them, be careful about the cops? I didn't. That thought didn't occur to me, frankly. Could I be the only Black person? No. It must be true for many Black people that the thought doesn't occur to them. But if I'm performing Blackness, then the talk would be a part of the act.
I don't want to say that I agree with you, but I feel you. Yes, it's become, it's not to discount what the cops can be like sometimes, but it has become a kind of shibboleth of being a proper Black person to talk of having given your kids that talk. And white people have learned the message. They know that part of being Black is that you have the burden of having to tell your kids this at some point. That's now become a meme among enlightened white people. And it's a bit of a performance. I'm not sure most of the people who are in that talk genuinely feel that their children are in danger of something really horrible happening if they encounter the police. You're showing a kind of group fellowship and a kind of higher.
On this point, Michelle Obama was asked, the question and about whether she feels worried that something might happen with what are their names again?
We know that they're girls, right?
Yeah, number one, they're girls, and that's a tough spot to be as a politician. In the marketing department, they're being asked that question because she had to give the right answer, which is yes, that she is worried. Yes, I feel your pain. I'm part of it's all one big black family. But no, they're over there in Martha's Vineyard. They're not worried.
You know what? So let me just spin the wheel a little bit. Everyone's talking about the cops. Maybe the conversation should be how to talk to a business investor, a financial investor, how to negotiate, when you're trying to buy a car, right? How to make sure how to write letters to creditors to dispute potentially negative reports on your credit, how to talk to your college professors, why is this,
and you'll never have to, and you get two things out of this deal. Number one, you will know how to talk to the cops because all this negotiation and talking blah blah blah. And then number two, you're going to be in the kind of neighborhood with the right kind of branding and associations that make it such that you're not going to have a hostile encounter with the cop.
Exactly.
So,
that's
all
narrative.
This is like, oh yeah, this sounds like snobbery and a particular thing, but no, generally speaking, because we're talking about something that's heavily socioeconomic,
right? And
it is tied to the education problem. For example, black boys and their reading. I'm sure you've heard the stat 10 billion times, right? The grade level at which the typical average black boy is reading that, and the fact that they're not represented in some of these particular majors in college, such as in STEM, for example, right? Which we know are the majors that are more likely statistically to create better outcomes for you in the future, right? These are all corollary issues, and if you give it a solution that can address partially, the social, or is it racism, is it psychological, what should the cops do, blah blah blah, but also addresses the economic and self-development, the achievement of the shall we say the attainment, the more close attainment of human potential, let's just call it. Because right now you're like, hey, there's a lot of human potential here. It's not being harnessed. It's not getting used up. They're not in these particular places. So that ends up having to be the way. Unfortunately, I tend to preach economics before politics. It's like you need to, when you want to go into that room to politic, to speak softly, okay? You have to have the big stick already, right? The Roosevelt said, speak softly but have a big stick, right? It's like people forget that it's not easy to, people just think, oh, it's like, no, it's not easy to have a big stick. It's like, and when you have a big stick, then you can speak softly, by the way.
Right.
When America walks into the UN, the meeting, whatever, it's like, with his thousands of nuclear weapons and trillions of dollars, and it can talk like, hey,
there you go.
You don't have to raise your voice.
Money talks, right?
You don't have to raise your voice. So that's the thing. Like when you get the economic aspect straight, and then some people will come back and say, hey, but there's economic warfare going on. It's like, yeah, I know that, but I'm telling you, if you look at the data in terms of the reading level, you can raise that up regardless of whom your enemy on the economic chessboard is. Okay, you can raise that up. You can raise your enrollment in certain types of programs up regardless of whom your enemy in the economic chessboard is. Okay, these things can happen, and these things will raise the overall stats of this particular group that we're concerned about, right? And that cannot go just kind of unheeded. The reason why it tends to go unheeded is because people like to be the noble victim.
That's right.
And this is not me.
Look at me.
Yeah, and this is not, by the way, this is not either of us just going on this, oh yeah, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, don't be a victim stuff. No, we're looking at this thing from all its facets of complication, right? And we're talking about now the aspect of why people are less likely to be inspired by purely economic arguments. Purely, let's move the numbers this way, let's get the education up this way, let's do these things, right? Purely economic, technical, technocratic. They would rather you talk about marching or rather you talk about the grievance, or in other words, talk about your enemy,
Right.
and that is out there and destroying your whole Pan-African dream.
Hey, it's more fun. Those are more fun conversations, you know.
Those are more
and,
fun conversations to talk about.
Right.
So here's one,
Because it requires no work.
boom. I like that you went there. It's a
Right.
brutal fact. It's something that, you know, when you do anything technical, and you and I both are kind of do some technical things and some creative things, right? So it's like the thing that you learn about when you do technical stuff is the rubber has to meet the road at some point. And also, you know, when you know certain domains where it's easy to just talk,
Right.
and you sound like you're doing something, right? And you're talking, and you're talking about talking, and you're talking about what could happen, and you're talking about moving massive pieces on the board, like, oh, if China just gave 50 billion to the south of, it's like, what are you talking about? like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, why would, like, come on. It's like, no, you got to come down to where you have traction already. And where is the rubber going to beat the road on this issue? What can we do right now? What is outside our doors right now? What is even if you want to play politics, what's the local politics around? Who's the local sheriff and with the local judge elections and all these stuff? Do you know these local people? Okay. People don't want to do that because, as you said, it requires work. Okay, well, let's continue.
Awareness, and I feel terrible saying that because I'm imagining a black mother who gives the book and actually means it. I can't say that she doesn't, but yeah, there's a part of me that thinks you're performing 1966 and doing that, but I'm not going to admit it.
Okay, he said it, but he didn't admit it.
All right, he said it, but he didn't admit it. We're gonna go back to Omar.
Okay, hit it.
Oh yeah, the school choice one is something I also. It was a recent, and got about 15 more minutes, and then we'll close it out. But there was a recent Supreme Court decision, okay, that basically said, "Hey, you, meaning the state, has to distribute funds to religious schools if you're going to fund private schools, right? In this kind of a charter system and the whole school, it's the whole about the whole school choice thing, of which there's a big, huge background with the charter system, school voucher, whatever. But the Supreme Court says, hey, that funding, state funding of religious schools has to happen if they're going to be funding private schools, even if the religious school says, you know, puts the whole religion thing in front of their, as part of their whole charter, if you will, their raison d'etre, their reason for being, their manifesto, right?
Okay.
So, and this opens up many opportunities for school choice amongst parents to leave the neighborhood schools and go to these other types of schools and take their money with them. Basically, it's like saying, hey, what's my chunk of tax dollars? What's my school? What's it worth to put my child here? Right? Take that money out and put it into this other school system, which is run differently. That's what these charter schools are about, right? Charter schools are like, okay, I'm gonna have a state-funded school that is kind of different from how the state run its stuff. It's experimentation, doing things differently, and a lot of them do well, apparently. And generally speaking, when it comes to choice, you know, I tend to be more on the yes, let 1,000 flowers bloom, as Glenn Lowry's about to reference here, and more choice, more decentralization, if you will, right? So that is what is the background to this. Okay. Because that recent Supreme Court decision, along with Roe v. Wade and a couple other things, which were interesting. I'm sure you've had a conversation or two.
I've had a few of those
about that. I try to
stay away, man.
That's why I have a YouTube channel. I can just come here, I say what I want, and I just don't talk to anybody.
Yes, and end the show.
Like, I'm not listening to you. So yes, that has opened up school choice, okay? And this affects the Black community in the sense that a lot of the schools in these Black neighborhoods are not up to snuff, right? They're not cutting it. And a majority of that is because of the property tax mode of paying for these schools, right? Where, you know, you have to, it's based on the property tax, hence the wealthier neighborhoods obviously do better. But anyways, let us play this a little bit and then we'll call it an evening, and we'll be back next Thursday.
Sweet.
Make some noise for Professor Lowry.
I want to ask you something. This morning, I pretended to read a book. And it was a very good book by one of our ilk, Ian Rowe, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and he's been a CEO of various charter schools.
Yeah, he's a big charter school entrepreneur here in the city.
Yes, he's very good at it. And when I say pretended to read, I don't mean to indicate disrespect. I didn't have time to read every page, but I read it. And one of the things was about school choice. He's a big believer in school choice making a big difference in Black kids' education. Now, from what I know, and I'm not taking on anything Ian has done personally, from what I know, the record on vouchers is not great. Say 20 years ago, talk about what I write. I used to always talk about school choice. I've stopped because the data doesn't seem good enough. Am I missing something?
Yeah.
Okay, tell me.
Well, I mean, not all, and first of all, it's not just vouchers. Charter schools are not just vouchers. Those are public institutions that are free from the regulatory restraints of the central system and can experiment and do different things. It's a mixed record. They're not all uniformly excellent, but the best of them are really very, very good. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let the market decide. This is what I would say.
What do you think about Glenn Lowry, by the way? I don't think you've heard of him before I started referencing his videos in this channel, right?
I don't think you've done that. He has a very balanced way of thinking, and I'm enjoying his thoughts. He tends to lean dangerously to the left and suddenly tips it back to the right, and I love that about him.
Let people come in, offer what they have to offer. Let parents make their choices. Let the money go with the parents and the kids. The money doesn't belong to the teachers. The money belongs to the parents and the kids. Let them go where they think their kids will be best educated. Those charters that are not performing should wither and die on the vine. Those that are should grow and should flourish. I think Ian and his baccalaureate high school that he's trying to stand up and the other things that he's done has very long waiting lists. I mean, that ought to tell you something. When you see people in the hundreds putting their name on a list, hoping to get called so they can avail themselves of a spot in the school is probably doing something right. Why wouldn't we want to encourage that as opposed to shut it down, limit it, cap it, and so forth and so on? The incentives here are all in the wrong direction. I mean,
now, follow the money. Why? Whom is fighting against charter schools? Okay, it's whenever you look at certain types of behaviors of bureaucratic institutions, of which the government is the biggest, baddest example, okay? It is about the public employees. It's about the people. It's about the teacher union in this particular case. Public employee unions. So let me explain something real quick about public employee unions, and you can see if you agree with me or not. So basically, typically, there's nothing wrong with people organizing as a union to negotiate with some guy that has capital, right? Right. That owns a company, with regards to what they're going to be paid. Group negotiation, let's call it, right? That's fine. And then the worker is represented and the owner is represented, and the owner kind of represents also his clients, right? In the sense that he still needs to be able to give a good service to them, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone, so that whole negotiation is happening. So in a public employee union case, the person that actually pays the money is not in the room. Okay, it's the taxpayer that pays the money. But you know the two people negotiating? A politician, okay, saying what he'll do for them if they give him their votes. Using whose money? The taxpayers' money.
Taxpayers' money, always.
So in the negotiation room between politicians and public employee unions are just the unions that run the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy does not want to kill itself, doesn't want to die, and doesn't want to change. So if you're like, what's the school voucher stuff? Removing the centralized control, removing the power from us, creating more choice and decentralization. We don't want that. We don't like that, right? Right. And if you're one of these people in the union and you're that's where your bread gets buttered, if you will, you'll probably agree with all that.
Of course, like, you're not gonna, like you said, follow the money, right?
Yeah, you're gonna fall in line with the money. You're gonna be like, yeah, that's all good. But here's the issue that everyone should look at, objectively speaking, is that when the negotiation between a public employee union and some politician is taking place, the person actually getting screwed is not in the room. That's the problem.
That is true. That is
with
very
that
true.
whole thing for me. But anyways, let's see here.
The central system has the incentive of stifling any innovation and any new development because they're trying to protect their sinecure. That's not the kids. That's the establishment. I'm for the kids.
That's a nice way of saying all that crap I just said.
Let my people go.
Trying to protect their sinecure. I'm like, I don't even know that word. Like, okay.
He asked.
Yeah, and I asked because I wanted that. I wanted you to say that because it's something interesting I've seen over the past 20 years, which is if the record on school choice isn't pristine, and it's not, yes, some of them have to wither. The statistics are not always as rosy as you would think. You would suppose if it's such conservative boilerplate to be in favor of school choice, at least to some extent, that there would be very obvious solutions to how you fix the ordinary public school. The idea would be you don't need this. Often it used to be said you're taking students away from the ordinary public schools. Well, how do you fix a public school that has gone wrong? And the fact is that usually when it's gone wrong, it's very hard to say that it's white people that are making it wrong. Usually it's people of color who are running the school. And I can think of 3 times, 2.5. I wasn't really paying attention the third time, but I can think of 2.5 times where I have sat in an education conference and watched somebody get up in a well-tailored suit with great confidence and talk about saving the public schools. And there's an audience out there who are looking at that person like he's Mick Jagger, and he's going to talk about how he's going to save the public schools. And he'll say something with a certain intonation, where melody is meaning, like, I've seen it, I can do it. And you're thinking, good. And the audience is all excited. And then over the next 20 minutes, doesn't say a damn thing. Might as well be in Hungarian. Doesn't say anything about how you would change the school. He's just well-tailored and inspiring. I'm talking about not only one person, but 2.5. I've never seen anything different. And if anybody knew how you change a public school, we would have heard by now. There would be beautiful.
I think that unfortunately, it may be a cliche or silly solution that I'm giving here, but I want you to respond to this, and perhaps you can close it here. I think that the solution to the public school thing has to just be the decentralization solution. And the problem with the decentralization solution is you might get some schools that are way worse than the average right now.
Well, are you talking about from a neighborhood standpoint?
So the idea is you have a centralized bureaucracy, okay, that controls the schools, the school board, the unions, the layers of administration that centralize things. And you have these vouchers, and charter schools charter schools are a way of breaking out of that centralization. And I think that allowing more breaking away from the centralization, including private schools to those people that can afford it. But I also think that the cost of private school or the cost of education can be reduced overall to include such that includes private schools by certain types of redistribution of the things that we're doing right now. Let me put this on the table. Inflation in education has been ridiculously astronomical compared to inflation in any other sector. If you just look back, let's say from the 60s. In other words, hey, I'm going to UCLA and I'm going to get a degree. What did it cost me back then versus now? It is stupid crazy. And a lot of the reason for it is not, there's several reasons, but it's a massive bureaucracy, okay, that is running a nightclub system, okay? Number one, you have the salaries for all these bureaucrats, including 10 layers deep of diversity and inclusion bureaucrats, okay? Those are there, well represented in every department and every whatever. There's a sub-dean for inclusion who reports to a higher provost for inclusion, and then blah, blah for all that kind of stuff is going on. And it's just about the customer. Hey, customer, come in. So what does the customer want? They want shiny new dorms and all this type of stuff and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, is that still whole, especially if it's the Ivy League, the whole Studio 54 model of here is a velvet roped up section. If you come in here, then you're part of a special club, not because of special education and going on in there and everything. But a big part of why the inflation also went up is because of the student loan program, okay? Because it was like a printing of dollars into the education system. We're like, oh, the student loans are going to pay for it? Think about it. The government is like, hey, you know what? So we know how this works. The government inflated massively education by a lot of its action. And I think that it could be a lot cheaper. And the decentralization argument will also be furthered by the technological front. By what I mean by that is the internet, right? So this decentralization of the information and internet, blah, 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 will remove this kind of centralization of education. And I think that in there will be the solution. And there, I'm going to go back to the problem with decentralization is that you're going to have schools that are worse than the average now, right? But you're going to get a general rising up of standards. And also, you're going to get more sensitivity to change and experimentation, because that's the nature of having local things versus a central thing.
Right.
The local thing is sensitive to local conditions and can change. It can experiment, it can die and regrow and all that kind of stuff. So that would be my general, shall we say, thoughts on this. But overall, with regards to the conversation about Omar and his encounter with the police, Omar and his attitude, Omar and, his bandana tied on his head like Tupac, and, Omar is angry and is antagonistic towards the police. Omar perhaps doesn't have a father figure at home.
That's
Omar
right.
gets rough handled by the cops, whom it is apparently the case that they do more roughhousing out there in black neighborhoods. And we talked about the socioeconomic components that bear upon all these issues,
Right.
and talked about the talk. And if I recall you correctly, you're boiling it down to a question of emotional intelligence, that you're
That's
not
correct.
going to say, hey, let me talk to you about how dealing with the cops. It's like the way I talk to you and behave and deal with my situations, which you observe, I'm teaching you every day what to do.
That's right.
If I'm going to teach you anything specifically, I'm going to teach you how to write letters to banks, or get appointments to banks to fund your idea, and get a consortium of people together to form. Anyways, so I'll give you the last word, sir. What you got to say?
Well, I think that we have to be, the biggest thing that we have to, and this isn't necessarily based on being the quote unquote black person. I think as humans in our society, one of the biggest things we can learn is how to be in control of how we react to the situation, and to be very careful with what assumptions and what stereotypes that we've accepted, knowing that you have the liberty to change that. And I think that that's what's governing how we react to situations. I as an African American, I've sat next to someone and their purse got pulled closer to them, and I didn't think it's because I'm black. I think the person is just being careful. I mean, the purse can slip away. Someone can take your purse. I mean, and if you walk around thinking that because of the color of your skin is why people are treating you that way, you will be buried, and that's not going to change. I think what changes is, like the late great Michael Jackson said, is the man in the mirror.
The man in the mirror. It's kind of interesting that the place where I feel the safest typically is at airports. What I mean is after you've checked in, right? Because it's like typically, think about it. If let's talk about it. Okay, there's a professional criminal aspect. Okay, professional robber. So they want to steal stuff. It's like what? So they're gonna buy a ticket, to Southwest or whatever, check in,
and then fake ID, and then
hope in this place with 1 billion cameras and federal blah blah, that I'm gonna jack laptops and somehow not. It's just a bad deal all around,
right?
And then the people, it's like, typically if you can afford a plane ticket, is he really trying to jack your laptop? He's got a laptop too, probably, and
probably
he's
better than yours.
Laptop right here at the airport with all his cameras, like, he's just trying to go home for Christmas. All of a sudden, so typically I'm like, you know what? I just need my laptop here, man. I'm gonna go walk over there, get a coffee, use the restroom, come back. Like, typically at airports, this is my reasoning anyway. I reason all this. I
thought I was the only one. I love airports. It's the great equalizer.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next week. And as a matter of fact, next week, we're going to continue on our market analysis. That whole financial, looking at investments of all kinds, looking at charts of all kinds, right? Looking at trends of all kinds. Because remember, we talked about some technical analysis stuff. Where's the chart going next? Where's the price action going next? And then we talked about some fundamental analysis stuff, right? We talked about the interest rates. We talked about the printing of money, the inflation. Will that lead to demand destruction? What's going on with unemployment numbers and such? So we're going to continue in that line, okay? With reviewing a video and seeing if, some of the ideas still follow through. And we'll keep it on the level of fundamental analysis.
Okay.
We'll get back into technical analysis later. Technical analysis is all that chart stuff. And we'll refresh ourselves on the charts. But fundamental, typically not so hard. Everyone has heard of interest rates, and everyone has heard of the feds, and everyone has heard about printing money, and on and on. So that is what we will be bringing back for our analysis. And shout out to everyone, by the way. says, what does Brooklyn Kevin says, one of the workers there could be a criminal. Brooklyn has got I didn't think of those workers.
They're the ones we should be watching out for.
It's those workers, man.
They'll say, "Hey,
man.
sir, that laptop, you can't fly with it. I'm gonna have to confiscate it." And next thing you know, you see it on eBay.
that janitor and that TSA agent, good work there, Brooklyn. Hey,
and they're the ones with the attitude. Sir, you need to step back 2 feet. I'm like, look, my son's crossed already. I'm just trying to get him.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are out.
Peace.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Likewise, sir.
In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what's a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what draws behind the curtain, the face of evil smirking with the shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannon could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.